everyone. I want to first thank you for being such an active member of Corpus Christi University Parish, and in a special way for your commitment to liturgical ministry here at Corpus Christi. We're filming these for some trainings we're doing in the different liturgical ministries: ushers, mass coordinators, extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion servers, and lectors, and just a kind of refreshment course in a certain sense. I've been here a number of years, and just sort of some things I've observed, but also kind of refreshing, and a few minor changes in each of the ministries. And so, again, first of all, thank you for your commitment to serve in these liturgical ministries. They assist us in the worship of God, and that's, of course, the point of joining the liturgical ministries. So before we get to any of the sort of things I want to emphasize in liturgical ministry or any proposed kind of minor changes, I want to stress sort of three foundational principles of liturgy and how I kind of approach our worship here at Corpus Christi. The first is that as the Second Vatican Council taught, the Mass and the liturgy are the source and summit of the Christian life. That what we encounter here every Sunday, every Saturday night and every Sunday is of the utmost importance to our faith, to the building up of our faith. It's the central mystery of the Christian life that we enter into Jesus' death and resurrection. And so all of the care that we take to making sure that the liturgy is done well, that ministers know what they're doing, that is all built around the idea that we are protecting and upholding the dignity of something that is so central to us as Christians, that we enter in to the sacrifice of Jesus and rise with him so that we can go out into the world and to be his missionaries of grace and love. And so sometimes it can seem like maybe we surround the liturgy with too many regulations and prescriptions and so on. But the truth is we protect with norms those things which we find particularly worthy of dignity. And so that is one of the reasons that we're so attentive here and at other parishes to the liturgy. The second foundational principle I'd like to suggest is that we don't create the liturgy creates us. It's something that we sort of recognize that we are inheritors of a Christian tradition of worship that is virtually 2,000 years old. Christian worship has looked very similar from the very beginning. It was basically an adaptation of two things within the Jewish tradition, which was the first part, the synagogue service, which is sort of absorbed into the liturgy of the Word, and then the second, which is the Passover meal, which becomes the sort of ancient origin of the liturgy of the Eucharist. And so the earliest origins we have of Christian worship has this twofold structure of the liturgy of the Word, of hearing of God's love story towards us, and then transitioning into taking part in and receiving the one Passover lamb who is Jesus. And so that central structure has been really present in Christian liturgy from the very beginning. We inherit that structure. And so in a certain sense, we have to be careful within the liturgy that we're not creating it as we want it to be, that we inherit a tradition, that the liturgy transforms us as we embark on that ancient structure of Christian worship, that twofold movement of the liturgy of the Word and of the liturgy of the Eucharist. The third thing I would say as a kind of foundation for liturgical ministry is that our role as liturgical ministers is one of prayer, not of performance. So one of the things, even as a priest, I have to be mindful of is that Christ has to be at the center stage of liturgy, not me as the priest, right? And sometimes that can be sort of easy to conflate because of the priest's central role in the liturgy. But it's true of all liturgical ministers that we are there to assist in the worship. We're not there to take sort of center stage, that we are to aid the prayer not to distract people from encountering Christ in the liturgy. One thing that sort of follows from this, which is that if we ever find ourselves, due to health or other factors, incapable of performing the ministry that we have sort of signed up for and done for many years, if we find that we're in some ways being distracting, or we can't perform that ministry to the level that it demands, it's an incredible act of humility to be able to step down, to realize that we aren't at the center of liturgy, but Christ is meant to be at the center of liturgy. And so, friends, those are just a couple things on my mind as we do some liturgical training here, which is that this is so important. The reason we put so much energy here at Corpus Christi and other parish into this is because it is the central mystery of the Christian faith, that we don't create it, it creates us, it transforms us as we enter into it, and that we're meant to be participants in the drama of liturgy, not the main actor, right? That's Christ, but to be participants of this incredible drama. So again, I want to thank you all for your commitment to this parish, and in a special way for your commitment to liturgical ministry. It makes the liturgy here, as I've said to a million people and as people brag about all over the city, I think arguably the best liturgy in town. It's an incredible experience here, and we want to continue to build on that legacy and continue that tradition. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being lectors here at Corpus Christi. I think you all know the incredible gift and opportunity it is to read the Word of God and to proclaim it in the midst of this assembly of faith. And so I want to thank you, because it's an incredibly sacred task that you have been given responsibility for and which you have committed to. And so thank you for your commitment to this essential part of our worship. A few things I'd like to emphasize as lectors. In the past, we've sort of, I think, gone back and forth on bowing in terms of when you come up for the reading. To me, I'm not as big on the uniformity of that. It's not necessary, because you've already bowed to the altar in the opening procession. So you notice some lectors feel like they still want to bow when they come forward from the reading, and they just bow on the side of the altar that they come from their seats. That's totally fine. To be honest, I'm not that concerned with the uniformity of that. That if you'd like to bow, if you're comfortable bowing again to the altar, feel free to do so. If you want to walk straight to the ambo from your seat, that's also totally appropriate, since you had already bowed in the opening procession. Most of you, in fact, we have incredible lectors here, but just to reiterate, confidence at the ambo, not being afraid of the mic, speaking up, speaking well, looking up questionable pronunciations before Mass, which you can easily find online and so on. Though, again, that's not the biggest deal either, because most people won't know the pronunciation of a word, including myself, in some of the biblical texts. But just taking the responsibility of preparing and proclaiming the faith seriously, which I know that you already do. I do want to emphasize that I'm not a big fan of changing the text as a lector. So I believe there is plenty of time in the church and in theological debate for translations of the biblical text, for arguing about the best way of interpreting a text, gender-inclusive language. Like, those are all legitimate debates to be had in the church and in theology. I just don't think during the liturgy is the time to have those. And so I would just ask, in a spirit of humility, to use the text as given. You may not necessarily agree with sort of how it's phrased. There are certain prayers, you might see me cringe at certain prayers even that I read in the missal that I think probably could be worded a little better. But I don't feel it's my necessarily job within the liturgy to take that on myself. I think there's ample time for that kind of debate outside of the liturgy. So I would urge you in a spirit of humility to embrace that, so that we don't take on our own sort of interpretive philosophy and ideological position doesn't take on sort of center stage in the liturgy. One just change for lectors is in the entrance procession. I would really like the gospel book to be on the altar when we all bow, so that we're bowing also. We're bowing to the altar of sacrifice, but we're also bowing to the book of the Gospels. And so right now, if there is no deacon, as you know, the first lector takes up the book of the Gospels, but splits right away. So what I would like to change is that first lector who's carrying the book of the Gospels, if there's no deacon, would walk straight ahead, place the book of the Gospels right on the edge of the altar in the center, and then move back to their place opposite the lector on the other side. I will wait until you get to your place, and then we will all bow together to the altar and to the book of the Gospels. We already do that when the deacon's there, because the deacon places the book on the Gospel, and then he splits to the left, and then we all bow together. This would just put us in conformity with that by having the lector place the book of the Gospels first on the altar, going back to their section or their spot, and then we'll all bow together. So it's a kind of a simple change, but will give us some consistency when the deacon's there and when the deacon's not there. So again, thank you for your ministry as lector. It's an incredible responsibility to read the Word of God, but an incredible grace and really a sacred task that you all have. And thank you for responding to the call to do that.